Off the coast of a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest continent, sits one of the strangest, most improbable ancient cities on Earth. Nearly 100 artificial islets, built up from massive columns of volcanic basalt stone, some weighing many tons apiece, arranged across a shallow coral lagoon and connected by a network of canals, so that the entire city can only really be properly navigated by boat. A genuine ancient Pacific version of Venice, constructed with a level of engineering ambition that still leaves modern visitors and researchers struggling to fully explain exactly how it was built. Using nothing but Stone Age technology on one of the most remote inhabited island chains on the entire planet. Today we're exploring the story of Nan Madol, its builders, the extraordinary engineering mystery surrounding its construction, and why, despite everything we do know, this remains one of the most genuinely underexplored ancient wonders anywhere in the world. Let's start with where exactly Nan Madol is, because its location is itself a huge part of what makes this site so remarkable. Nan Madol sits just off the eastern coast of the island of Pohnpei, part of the Federated States of Micronesia, a small island nation scattered across the western Pacific Ocean, roughly halfway between Hawaii and the Philippines, one of the most isolated inhabited regions on the entire planet. Pohnpei itself is a relatively small volcanic island, and Nan Madol was built not on the island's main landmass, but on a shallow coral reef flat just offshore, an already unusual and challenging choice of location for any ancient construction project, let alone one on this scale. The city consists of an estimated 92 individual artificial islets, constructed by building up platforms of stone and coral rubble within the shallow lagoon, then stacking massive columns of a distinctive volcanic rock called basalt around the perimeter of each islet to form retaining walls. Some of these walls rising 25 feet or more above the water. These artificial islets are arranged in a careful, deliberate layout, separated and connected by a network of tidal canals, meaning the entire settlement was designed from the outset to be navigated primarily by canoe, rather than by walking, an ancient city built to be traveled by water, giving rise to the popular modern nickname, the Venice of the Pacific. Archaeological evidence indicates that construction at Nan Madol began sometime around the 8th or 9th century CE, with the most intensive, large-scale construction phases occurring later, generally dated to roughly between the 12th and 13th centuries, continuing to be expanded and used as an active political and ceremonial center for several centuries afterward. At its height, Nan Madol served as the capital and ceremonial center for the Saudeleur dynasty, a powerful ruling lineage that unified and governed the island of Pohnpei for several centuries, representing, as far as archaeologists and historians can determine, the first and only time in Pohnpei's history that the entire island was brought under a single, centralized political authority. Nan Madol functioned as far more than just a royal residence. The city was organized into distinct districts serving different specific purposes, generally divided by researchers into two main sections. Pohnpei, meaning roughly upper town in the Pohnpeian language, contained the most important religious and ceremonial structures, including numerous temple complexes associated with different aspects of Saudeleur religious practice. Madol, or lower town, contained residential islets believed to have housed the ruling elite, along with facilities for food preparation, canoe construction, and other practical administrative and economic functions necessary to support the royal court and religious establishment. The single most impressive and most extensively studied structure within Nan Madol is Nandawas, a massive royal mortuary complex believed to have served as the burial site for Saudeleur rulers. Nandawas features towering walls constructed from those massive columnar basalt stones, some individual stones estimated to weigh as much as 5 tons, stacked in a distinctive log cabin style construction technique, alternating the orientation of successive stone layers for structural stability, rising in places to heights exceeding 25 feet, enclosing an inner courtyard and burial vault that would have been considered deeply sacred and restricted space within Saudeleur, religious and political life. Now here's where the genuine engineering mystery of Nan Madol really comes into sharp focus, because the numbers involved in this construction project are frankly staggering. Researchers estimate that the total volume of basalt stone used across the entire construction of Nan Madol may exceed 750,000 metric tons, an almost incomprehensible quantity of stone, especially when you consider that this entire massive construction project was undertaken by a Pacific island society that, as far as archaeological evidence indicates, had no access to metal tools, no wheeled vehicles, no draft animals capable of hauling heavy loads, and no pulley systems of the kind that helped other ancient civilizations move massive stones elsewhere in the world. The basalt columns themselves present their own specific engineering puzzle. These distinctive columnar basalt formations, naturally occurring hexagonal or pentagonal stone columns that form when certain types of volcanic lava cool and contract in a specific characteristic pattern, similar geologically to other famous natural basalt column formations found elsewhere around the world, needed to be quarried from specific volcanic source locations on Pohnpei, some of which have been identified by researchers at sites located several miles away from Nan Madol itself, requiring these multi-ton stone columns to somehow be transported that considerable distance, very likely primarily by raft or canoe across open or nearshore ocean water, before being precisely maneuvered into position and stacked to build the massive retaining walls we see at the site. Today, exactly how the Saudeleur builders accomplished this remarkable feat of engineering and logistics remains a subject of genuine ongoing archaeological research and informed speculation, rather than a fully, definitively solved puzzle. The most widely supported working theory among researchers proposes a combination of techniques, transporting the massive basalt columns from their quarry sites via specially constructed rafts or canoes, timed carefully to take advantage of favorable tides and currents, then using systems of log rollers, levers, and very likely substantial coordinated human labor, potentially involving ramps built up temporarily from coral rubble and other available material, to maneuver these enormous stones into their final precise positions within the walls under construction. It's a plausible, technically feasible explanation, broadly consistent with construction techniques other ancient societies are known to have used elsewhere in the world for moving massive stones without modern machinery. But it's important to be honest that we don't have detailed, direct historical documentation of the specific step-by-step engineering process the Saudeleur builders actually used, and reconstructing those exact techniques remains an active area of archaeological experimentation and study. What makes this engineering achievement even more genuinely remarkable is the broader context of where it occurred. Pohnpei is a small remote Pacific island, and the society that built Nan Madol did not have access to the kind of large-scale agricultural surplus, large labor pools, or extensive trade networks with other major population centers that helped fuel monumental construction projects in places like Egypt, Mesoamerica, or Cambodia's Angkor. This means the labor and resources required to move and stack 750,000 metric tons of stone had to be drawn almost entirely from Pohnpei's own relatively limited local population and resources. A genuinely impressive feat of organized labor mobilization and long-term political and religious authority, sustained across multiple generations for a society operating on this scale and with the resources available to a single, isolated Pacific island. Given just how genuinely mysterious the engineering behind Nan Madol's construction remains even to professional archaeologists today, it's perhaps unsurprising that local Pohnpeian oral tradition offers its own explanation, one considerably more dramatic than log rollers and carefully timed ocean currents. According to traditional local legend, Nan Madol was constructed not through ordinary human labor at all, but through the magical power of two legendary brothers, sorcerers named Olisipa and Olosopa, said to have arrived at Pohnpei from a distant foreign land, seeking a suitable location to build an altar where they could properly worship the island's agricultural deity. According to this traditional account, these two brothers possessed the magical ability to cause the massive basalt stones to fly through the air themselves, levitating the enormous columns into position through sorcery and ritual chanting, rather than through ordinary physical labor and engineering, ultimately establishing themselves as the first rulers of what would become the Saudeleur dynasty once their remarkable magical construction project at Nan Madol was complete. It's worth taking a moment to appreciate this legend on its own terms, not simply dismissing it as primitive myth-making, but recognizing it as a genuinely meaningful piece of Pohnpeian cultural memory and tradition, quite possibly containing distorted, symbolically encoded traces of real historical information, including the arrival of politically ambitious outside figures, the establishment of a new, unifying centralized political and religious authority on the island, and an honest, deeply felt cultural acknowledgement. expressed through the language of myth and magic, of just how genuinely extraordinary and difficult to explain this engineering achievement truly seemed, even to the descendants of the people who possibly built it. Now let's turn to the mystery of Nan Madol's eventual decline and abandonment, because much like the other lost civilizations we've explored, this remarkable Pacific city did not remain the vibrant political and ceremonial center it had once been indefinitely. The Saudeleur dynasty's centralized rule over Pohnpei, and by extension, the political and religious significance of Nan Madol itself as their capital, is generally believed by historians and archaeologists, drawing on a combination of archaeological evidence and Pohnpeian oral historical tradition, to have come to an end sometime around the early 17th century, when the Saudeleur rulers were overthrown, according to local oral tradition, by a legendary cultural hero figure named Isokelikul, who is said to have arrived at Pohnpei leading a group of warriors, ultimately defeating the last Saudeleur ruler and establishing a new, decentralized political system across the island, organized instead around multiple separate local paramount chiefs. A political structure that in modified form continues to exist on Pohnpei today. Following this political transition, Nan Madol's role as the island's centralized political and religious capital effectively ended, and the city gradually declined in active use and population over the subsequent decades and centuries. Though it's important to note, much as with several other sites we've discussed, that Nan Madol was never entirely abandoned or forgotten by the Pohnpeian people in the way popular narratives of lost or rediscovered ancient cities sometimes imply. The site retained, and continues to retain today, deep cultural, historical, and spiritual significance for the people of Pohnpei, who maintained ongoing oral traditions, cultural knowledge, and in many cases, spiritual respect and caution regarding the site across the intervening centuries. Even as its role as an active, densely populated political capital came to an end, there's also a more speculative, though genuinely discussed, environmental thread to Nan Madol's story worth mentioning. Some researchers have proposed that gradually rising sea levels over the centuries since Nan Madol's initial construction may have contributed to increasing challenges, maintaining the site's lower-lying structures and canal systems over time. Though this remains a more preliminary area of ongoing research compared to the more thoroughly documented political transition associated with the Saudeleur dynasty's overthrow. And most historians currently place considerably more emphasis on that political and social transition as the primary driver of Nan Madol's decline as an active political capital, rather than environmental factors being the dominant cause. What makes Nan Madol such a genuinely compelling addition to any exploration of history's great, mysterious lost cities is this particular, almost paradoxical combination of factors. An engineering achievement of a scale and ambition that would be remarkable anywhere in the ancient world, accomplished on one of the most remote, resource-limited island locations on the entire planet, using construction techniques that remain, even today, only partially and provisionally understood by the archaeologists and engineers who study the site most closely, wrapped in a genuinely rich, still-living local oral tradition involving sorcery and flying stones that captures, in its own vivid symbolic language, just how extraordinary this achievement seemed even to the very descendants of the people who most likely built it. And yet, despite all of this, Nan Madol remains even now remarkably underexplored in global popular awareness compared to sites like the Pyramids of Egypt, Machu Picchu, or Angkor Wat. A genuinely spectacular ancient wonder sitting quietly in one of the most remote corners of the Pacific Ocean. Its massive basalt walls still standing after roughly 1,000 years. Its canals still filling and draining with the daily rhythm of the tides, waiting, in many ways, for the wider world to properly discover and appreciate just how genuinely remarkable an achievement this isolated Pacific stone city truly represents. A testament to human engineering ambition and organizational sophistication achieved with nothing more than Stone Age tools, coordinated human labor, and an evidently deeply held cultural and religious conviction. Held firmly enough to move 750,000 tons of volcanic stone across open ocean water. Stone by massive stone to build a city meant to be traveled only by boat, in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth.